Charles, it's a bit of an unusual turn of events for us here, but there was such a big bit of news that you brought to my attention this morning. I thought it was important that we have a special Monday with Charles.
I thought you just wanted to walk around like pretending we were in Bosnia.
Right. Bosnia via 25th Street. Well, so we have recorded a little segment where you run through the details of what these Ranbaxy criminals are up to. Why don't we let people have a moment to take a look at that?
Sure, that's a great idea.
Yesterday, we were talking about the likelihood that things were going to get much hotter in the kitchen, in the global kitchen, for the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton crime family. And unbeknownst to me, I've been following many other stories, but I didn't notice that I would argue, evil Singh brothers of India had been arrested last week for their participation in yet another alleged fraud scheme. Now, these are the people who were allowed to take over a company, Ranbaxy, that had been established either by their uncle or their father a long time ago. At a young age, these guys got involved with it, and they just burned it to the ground, basically. But they got away with selling it first to the I would argue, naive Japanese drug company that bought it almost at the top of the India bubble, or the credit bubble in 2007-8. And the Japanese, in my experience, when the Japanese make a mistake, especially in corporate land, they don't want to admit it.
They cover it.
And they try to cover it up. But
saving face, right?
In this case, there was no face left to save. And they eventually went after the Singh brothers. And
the Japanese did?
The Japanese did. Corporate firm went after the Singh brothers and got, the Singhs, of course, fought them in Indian courts. It was moved to Singapore. And ultimately, they did win a judgment, which of course now the Singhs can't pay because they've lost all their money, and so they were arrested. And this is just the Ranbaxy fraud is one thing. There's several other. There's a Fortis healthcare thing that they messed up, and then there's this latest thing that they got tagged for. Now, why is this all interesting? It's interesting because when we listen to the lamestream press, caterwaul about conspiracy theories, which they do.
Nothing about these guys.
Nothing about these guys, despite the fact that there was a big story in Fortune magazine and in CNN, May 2013, by this great reporter and author, Catherine Eban, called Dirty Medicine. We have a link to it later. And so there's little coverage of it and a refusal to go back and ask the big question. Why did Bill and Hillary Clinton encourage and indeed switch the policy, the American foreign policy, from that of favoring, as Obama would like to say, Pakistan, to favoring India, which happened in the 93 to 2001 timeframe and afterwards at the instigation of the Clintons. Who might benefit from that? And the answer is a generic drug company, Ranbaxy, that had managed to get a significant share of the US market, but as we later learned, that Ranbaxy firm was inventing its test results. And today, we Americans and people around the developed world are hostage to these generic drug companies where it seems nobody was testing and checking to make sure that the medicines we were getting in the United States, people were getting in Europe, and most importantly, in the populations that are growing too quickly in Africa and Asia, nobody was doing the requisite checking, or alternatively, there was an evil plot afoot to make sure that these diabolical drugs would go to parts of the world where there was a population control problem.
Now, wait a second, Charles, because I understand the issue where the Clintons got into business with Ranbaxy and funneled money that was sent to the Clinton Foundation to this crooked pharmaceutical company to send drugs essentially into an African hole somewhere that nobody ever checked. But how are Americans held hostage by?
Yeah, so what was happening is there's a number of drugs have gone off patent, and I think Ranbaxy's business model was to gain a very large share in the US of providing generic drugs. So people have their eyes on the African HIV/AIDS problem, the Asian HIV/AIDS problem, but they need to also start going back and doing their homework and saying, now wait a minute, this company has admitted that it did not test any of its drugs.
Wow.
Anywhere.
That's amazing.
In compliance with law. Instead, gamed the system, took advantage, one would argue, of our lax FDA, And how far has this problem gone? And why did so many people give them a pass? This Catherine Eban, we'll talk about it in a second, in her latest book, points out something I long suspected, and we talked about, that Rod Rosenstein, who was leading the charge to discipline Ranbaxy and ultimately signed the agreement, he may have given them a pass in only fining them $500 million. That is to say, maybe what we should have done is lock these motherfuckers up, and I apologize for using that word, but in this case, two spoiled brat Indian thugs got involved with this generic company, and the people were supposed to check all this in the FDA and the oversight committees and the press. They said, we're having too much fun getting dumber and fatter and happier with this globalist swamp. And so finally this has come out, at least in India, when you get arrested, especially as a wealthy person, and they were first sent, I believe, to just 5 days in prison.
What?
If you want to lose a lot of weight quickly, spend 1 day in an Indian prison. Life would not be very good for these guys, even as well connected as they are. For the Indians to stand up and do something about this, you got to be very certain that the head of the country is well aware of this. And then I hope Donald Trump and people in Congress are taking a hard look at this, because to me, it makes no sense whatsoever in 2019 to allow foreign drug companies to provide us with drugs that are generic, that are made in a place where nobody could check it. It seems to me, with automation and with the tools that we have today, you should be able to make generic medicine in Manhattan and have it not really cost that much more, because you make it highly mechanized and whatever.
They had that pharma bro Martin Shkreli who was in Manhattan. They threw him in jail for trying to get Hillary Clinton's hair or something like that.
Exactly. So I mean, this is actually a very big development. I was alerted to it this morning by one of our close friends, and I called you up, obviously, said, you actually said maybe we should talk about this in more depth.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Right. All right, well, take us through it, Charles. I mean, everybody who's a regular viewer knows the basics. I think we can get right in.
Sure. So if we go to some of these links, to hit the first link, this is the Indian press, and I've had the fortune to visit India many times, including the last trip I was there for 90 days. The Indian press is actually very well advanced. Of course, there are a lot of Indians, and English is a very popular language there. I believe the English language newspaper with the biggest circulation in the world is based in India. So here's the story that appeared. I don't know the date of this particular story, but it's just out in the last week or so, the 12th of October. So these dudes were sent to prison in yet another fraud case.
Wow.
And I think when you're accused of fraud once, maybe you get a pass, but if there's a consistent pattern and practice of you being accused at Ranbaxy, at Fortis, and now with this latest fraud, and when you think about people who, like these two guys, who grew up very well off, probably under enormous pressure to attempt to replicate the success of their parent or their father, it can be, I have sympathy. As somebody who's musically impaired, I mean, I could tell if I like this or dislike that. But my mother was a fantastic musician and expected me to play the piano. There's no way I could do it, So maybe these two Indian dudes are like supposed to be good at business, and they don't even know how to play checkers, let alone how to negotiate and outfox people and develop products and markets and whatever. But here they are, caught yet again. And I would argue that there ought to be enormous leverage against these two to now figure out what in the hell really happened with Ranbaxy and the Clinton Foundation going back to 2003.
Yeah, they strike me as the type of guys who might, in fact, sing.
Exactly, right. And perhaps well.
Yes.
So if we go back to the second story, this is just to show you the number of stories that are out there. I noticed in the Irish press and the Indian press, the tone of a lot of the stories tend to be, this person is fantastic, this person walks on water, this is the second coming. And there were a whole bunch of stories like that about Ranbaxy in 2006, 7, 8. Yeah, because it was one of the very few Indian companies that was really doing well outside India, and it was a multi-billion-dollar company. So I think this company even was voted Company of the Year in India back in around the time the Clintons got involved with it. And so you have these everything's fantastic stories, and now these people are goats or worse than goats. And that's the tone of this latest story here in a legitimate Indian publication.
Wow.
So this has become, when the Indian press turns on once great people, they're gonna go full hog, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Now, here's another paper, again, another negative paper just out, a story just out, an opinion piece, talking about having the inverse Midas touch. I think we might say it's called the touch of shit over here.
Right.
But it's really something, and I think it's.
These guys look like something out of an Austin Powers movie. They look almost identical, so they wear the same suit. That's stupid.
They could be identical twins, maybe.
Oh my gosh.
But I don't know. But the point here is that the saga, if we go back and we think about the number of once lionized prominent Indian business people who today are in prison or were in prison. You have Rajat Gupta, who was the first non-developed world managing partner of McKinsey, the prominent or preeminent consulting firm. You then he went to prison for insider trading and was centrally involved in the process, in my view, of connecting the Clintons to Ranbaxy. We'll get into that in a second. You have Raj Ratnam, who is still in prison for insider trading, and he was involved with the Clinton Foundation and involved with the American India Foundation, involved with Bill Clinton, involved with Rajat Gupta, et cetera. And now you have these Singh people who contributed to the Clinton Foundation, worked with the Clinton Foundation, as we'll show you in a second. And one would hope that even Christopher Wray, about whom I have major problems, even he and the FBI today should be able to connect the dots here and say, now wait a minute, this whole tale of the Clinton Foundation getting in bed with Ranbaxy needs to be reinvestigated. Here's a piece. Yesterday we went through a lot of numbers on 2003 and 2004. And in the past 180 episodes, if you're not convinced now that we don't really know what the Clinton Foundation was actually doing from October 23rd, 97 to December 31st, 2004 and 5, here's a piece where Hillary Clinton takes credit, April 29th, 2004, or gets credit for setting up this new Senate India caucus, which is supposed to be a way for the US Senate to help formulate policy with regard to India. And in code, it is probably a way for Hillary Clinton to do her level best to get campaign money out of the American Indian community and to have her husband concoct deals, and her daughter, that frankly, who was working at McKinsey at this time with Rajat Gupta, concoct deals to feather the Clinton and Clinton Foundation donors' nests, trying to take advantage of what then in 2004 was a very promising economy. So if we go to the next slide, I put this, notice I say Hillary Clinton, the Democrat from Punjab. And people should be careful about giving me a lot of crap about that, because in this next slide, the group that decided to hang Hillary Clinton with that connection was Barack Obama's group. And he actually, and I misspell his name in this actually, but A-C-K. His opposition research group early in the campaign in mid-2007 attacked Hillary Clinton for her suspicious ties to, among other people, somebody who I think who ultimately went to prison or did a plea deal, who had the restaurant, Sant Chantwal. There are a lot of extremely suspicious people around the Clinton Foundation and around the Clintons who happen to have a connection to India, as we'll explain in some more depth in a second. So back on the slide, let's see. Here, this is the Dirty Medicine article that I told you about, and I really would commend, this lady, Catherine Eban, has got a great book out, but this story here, if it doesn't shock you, it's a 10,000 word story, so there's no point trying to scroll through all of it, but it's incredibly in-depth. It came out and was published just after Lois Lerner dropped a dime on herself, saying in the Friday before this thing came out, saying that, yeah, we did spy on conservative groups at the IRS. So this story, which appeared in Fortune, and the way stories work at Fortune, they don't just sort of magically appear. There's a lot of advanced discussion. Editors have to sign off on it. There are long lead times. They think carefully about it. So likely the Clintons knew this story was coming because they're so wired into the media. And they said, okay, we got this firestorm coming. We got to bury this Ranbaxy story, especially because Bill Clinton was in India in April of 2013 praising Ranbaxy and the Singhs right before the story came out. I want to give a shout out to Marsha Blackburn and Richard Pollack, who now is at America One News Network. Here's a story that is really a feature of the staff of Marsha Blackburn's work on Ranbaxy and the whole, going back into this whole long history, this story came out mid-September 2016. So it was right before the election in the supposed quiet period. And it probably pushed a lot of Democrats back, particularly Berniacs, looking at this and saying, wait a minute, the Clinton Foundation was doing what? They were taking credit for fighting HIV and AIDS, when in reality, this article says they were sending around watered-down drugs, September 19th.
Perhaps too kind.
Way too kind. And so, of course, Media Matters and their surrogates and the Clinton campaign and others likely jumped all over this. And this great piece here, the Clinton Foundation and the India success story, you can't find it online now.
What do you mean?
Well, in part because it was issued when Marsha Blackburn was in the House. She's not in the House. And so I wonder if they just took it all down because she left. But it's an exhaustive report filled with footnotes. A lot of great work was done here. And Pollack gets, if you go to the next link, he gets instantly attacked by people I had spoken to I call it PolitiFraud, but they call it PolitiFact. They push this piece out basically saying it's a conservative website. And, frankly, Tucker Carlson, I believe, has a significant ownership interest in the Daily Caller. I wouldn't necessarily say he's just conservative. He's got some conservative views and some progressive views or whatever. But they tried to make it seem like Pollack was wrong. And unfortunately for them, I had already called into PolitiFraud, and I had spoken to the person who was looking at this. And I always do ask people, before we get into debates on the subject, how much did this dude know about charity law? And he said, absolutely nothing. I know nothing about it. So on the basis of not knowing anything, he tries to, quote, debunk Richard Pollack. And Pollack is an Emmy Award winner. He's in his late 60s now. He's a veteran. He was, I think, the Washington, D.C. producer for Good Morning America, and then he was the first producer, I think, in Washington of Fox News Sunny. And he doesn't need to work for anybody, so he wasn't going to take this crap. And he put this excellent piece out right before the election. I think it went out November, if you go down a little bit on the page, I think it went down November 3rd. Yeah, it's right before the election, 4 days before the election. And there wasn't really a reaction to it because it was correct, what Richard said. And now we have, if we go back into the slide, now we have news of this new book. And I'd like, Jason, if you could hit this link. I've purchased the book. I've begun to look at it. And I seldom say to the Crowdsource the Truth community that I really would like you to buy anything. Go out, buy this book, read this book, send this book to people who are on the fence about the Clinton Foundation and on the fence about the need to break the swamp and break the back, the legs, the spine of the people who are benefiting from this swamp. You've got to read this book. Because this is not simply, she takes this a lot farther than the Clinton Foundation or India. This is about how much trouble can you get into by allowing drugs that are wrongly formulated or adulterated to start going around the world. What you can actually, it's not just you'll kill people, you are going to increase the resistance that people have to medicines that might otherwise work. And by an estimate cited in her book, because of what happened to date, 300 million extra people are going to die in the estimate of these scientists.
300 million?
30 million a year, 10 million a year for the next 30 years are going to die because of what was going on here. That instead of, if you think about it, I would assume, perhaps falsely, that Bill Clinton and his team could put up a library in Little Rock. you know. And the reason I would say, you know, I could imagine myself assuming that. I mean, the guy was president of the United States. If he woke up on the wrong side of the bed, he could have pushed, you know, told the people with a football, why don't you blow up Bosnia or some other place, and he could have gotten away with it. Somebody like that should have the common sense to know how to actually build a library, but we've shown you that he didn't. You know, that they had no control whatsoever over that thing, to put it charitably or politely. But with regard to deciding, here's a guy who, when he was president of the United States, did a horrific job on HIV and AIDS. He didn't get money allocated to it in the very beginning. People who are, I'm not, you know, an expert on medical stuff, but people, particularly on the hard left, believe that Bill Clinton's failures as president to really attack this aggressively early on, starting in '93, likely led to acceleration and deaths of many around the world, especially even in our country. So I think this guy, having surrendered his law licenses, and that's a material fact when you're operating a charity inside the US, many states, many foreign nations, you have to disclose the fact that you were forced to surrender your law licenses for lying under oath and obstructing justice when you're president of the United States. That's a relevant fact when somebody, a regulator, is trying to say, well, should this foundation have the right to distribute HIV and AIDS medicine around the world? Of course they didn't disclose this. So when you think about the people around the Clintons who were letting Bill do what he did, letting Hillary in the Senate do what she did, and you cannot get away, as they have gotten away to date, with making a statement that Bill did, and when he looked at his foundation, he did more good than harm. No, he didn't. He did a lot more harm than good, and that, by the way, is not the standard for measuring whether a charity has done good work.
It's kind of not the standard for measuring anything.
Yeah, unless you're, I don't know, a mercenary, or you're, you know, a crime boss or something like that. Well, wait a minute, that's what they actually are.
Right.
So this is, on balance, I mean, I said yesterday that I thought things were moving not knowing about this, but now that we know that the Indian government is out there and the head of the country has got a lot to answer for. I mean, it's not like there are many world-leading operations out of India. One of them was the health sector. They were bringing the cost of medicine down around the world. They have this idea that you travel to India to get medical care more cheaply than you'd have to pay for it in the developed world. I mean, it's a very important sector for India. Ira Magaziner was involved, I understand, way back in trying to help the Indian government think through how to position India, just as he did in Ireland, saying you ought to go look at the health sector. So quickly, things that need to be studied and need to be explained. Any report coming out of the government on the Clinton Foundation that does not address these issues necessarily will be viewed by me as incomplete and a cover-up. So the first issue is, we know, and we don't have to hit these links because I don't want to go on forever here. We know that Project Garuda was a project that Ranbaxy mounted with the help of McKinsey. Unclear whether the origins of this project were late 1990s or early 2000s, but it was to take this Indian entity, which was a large entity, and position it as a global market leader in the provision of generics. That we know. We know on the 19th of January 2001 that Bill Clinton did indeed surrender his law licenses. And we know, I know, and others know around the world who are lawyers, that that is a material defect. That, as President of the United States, the sitting President of the United States, you were forced to surrender your law licenses because you interfered with an investigation for a long time, you know, and lied under oath.
Yeah.
You know, probably not going to take your word too seriously from now on, right?
Well, because it seems that lawyers can get involved in some pretty gross transgressions and not suffer repercussions in the way that a non-lawyer would. I don't know why that is, but they seem to be able to do it.
Yeah, and if you think about it, it's a good point you raised, JC. Think about the people around this Clinton Foundation. The most egregious ones are all lawyers.
Yes.
Hillary Clinton, Cheryl Mills, Bruce Lindsay, go on and on and on. It seems that, you know, you got a serious crime you want to commit, get a lawyer. Get an Arkansas lawyer, right?
Well, yeah.
So we know the next, sometime on the 19th, he does the deal with Paula Jones, and early in the morning of the 20th, he issues presidential pardons. We've talked about Mark Rich and Pincus Green, but there are others. His brother, the Puerto Rican terrorists and all that.
TFA?
Yeah,
or something?
FALN, I think.
FLAN, yeah.
Or ALN, or whatever they are.
They
From
want
Puerto
some
Rico.
flan, and they're blowing up restaurants to get it.
Right. So we know that he did that. We don't exactly know the role yet, and this is a little off topic, of the Israeli then Prime Minister, who's the friend of Epstein.
Ehud Barak.
Ehud Barak was very much in the middle of all this because he was still Prime Minister of Israel as Bill was stealing the furniture out of the White House or whatever he was doing out of the White House. Very much involved in that. We don't yet know the full details as to why the pardons were issued and why the investigation didn't go as deeply, we talked about this yesterday, into the Clinton Foundation at the time.
See, this is also interesting, Charles, because people have been pointing out to me that Dr. Gregory Ford, who has told us that he was listening in on a conversation between the Prime Minister of Israel and Larry Silverstein, incorrectly stated that the Prime Minister of Israel in 2001 was Benjamin Netanyahu. As a matter of fact, shortly after this, it became Ariel Sharon, who died in 2006. So people are having some issues with that episode of Light on Conspiracies with Ole Damagard. All of this is like conspicuously happening right around September 11th, just before.
Well, right before, yeah. And so then on the 26th of January, I mean, it was an accident, I would hope, this earthquake. It was a horrible earthquake in India. But Bill gets together with this now felon, Rajat Gupta, who then was at the height of his power as managing partner of McKinsey, and they create this crooked American India Foundation. We put this for new viewers, maybe let's just hit this one link. This is a piece by Alana Goodman that came out, I want to say in 2015, I may have it wrong, that traces the surprising number of links of crooked people accused of fraud or convicted of crimes, the surprising number of links among those people, yes, November 16th, 2015, and Bill Clinton and the Clinton family, right? The American India Foundation, even today, is the largest charity in the United States of America that in theory operates to advance, to relieve poverty and other problems in India, and it has never been brought to account. The very same day this earthquake happened, by accident, I'm sure it's just a coincidence, that Gupta's wife and another McKinsey partner's wife, the other guy, had also been hounded out of McKinsey for problems, but he was never convicted of anything. They created an LLC in Nevada through which they later route millions of dollars to the entire Clinton family for their expenses, to Bill, to Hillary, and to Chelsea. And this is discussed at length in this link. You don't need to pull it up now, Jason. People have seen it before. McKinsey was, and Gupta in particular, was centrally involved in creating the Global Fund. He ultimately became the chairman of the Global Fund, which is the largest, I believe, non-government entity, in theory, fighting HIV/AIDS, that is riven with corruption. It is the center of corruption. It's based in Geneva. People close to that thing have come out and estimated that up to three-quarters of the money that coursed through the Global Fund likely was stolen. And that we're talking there about $750 to $60 billion.
Wow.
So it's not small money.
Wow.
Yeah. So McKinsey, centrally involved with the Gates Foundation, paid by the Gates Foundation, centrally involved with the Global Fund. And guess who writes various master's theses, one or more master's theses?
Chelsea.
And a PhD thesis on the Global Fund. It's Chelsea. So,
and she's working for McKinsey.
And she was exactly working for McKinsey at this time. And the question is, we look at the kind of deference that Paul Manafort gets or Roger Stone gets in the search for Russian collusion hoax truths. I mean, Chelsea Clinton has never worked an honest day in her life. Every single job that she's gotten has been a sinecure, has been given to her as a gift. She is a multimillionaire today. She doesn't care that she needs money. She was right there in the center as the Clinton Foundation illegally got involved fighting HIV/AIDS internationally. She has a PhD in this field. She has no excuses for failing to come completely clean as to what she knows, as to what was going on from 2002 forward with respect to her family, herself, and the Clinton Foundation fighting HIV and AIDS. This book here, I had the date wrong in my mind. I thought it was October it came out. Joe Conason, I want to thank Joe. He is an ardent liberal and Democrat, I believe, or supporter of the Clintons. If we hit this link, Jason, this book, Joe and his publisher call it Man of the World. And I like to call it Confession of Charity Fraud, because I think that's exactly what it is. It came out September 13th, 2016, so just before Richard Pollack's article came out with a different take on what the Clinton Foundation was doing. But when you look through this book, as I've done, I've read it many, many times, the footnotes first, and thought about it and cross-checked it with other things that I do know. This is a straight-up confession of charity fraud. And if Christopher Wray needs some help, you know, I hope the FBI can still afford to buy, let's say, a paperback copy for $2.50 and deputize some, I don't know, intern to read it, and then cross-check the admissions against interest, the admissions of guilt by the various people cited in here, the facts that are cited in here, that they go chapter and verse through the Clinton Foundation's work prior to September 29th, 2009, fighting HIV and AIDS, citing meetings with governments, and all sorts of facts that you could cross-check. How come the FBI hasn't done this? And if they don't do this, especially given the new furor about the Singh brothers, then we'll know this is yet another cover-up involving Christopher Wray.
Right. Another thing probably worth mentioning about admissions against interest, Charles, it's one way that hearsay statements can be admissible in court.
Is that right?
Really? When they're admissions against interest, they sometimes authenticate themselves.
Uh-huh. Well, so here's, we don't need to hit this link, but here's a piece that talks about that Chelsea was at McKinsey from 2003 to 6. There are multiple quotes attributed to Rajat Gupta where he takes credit for Chelsea's being hired. Ooh. She was hired into...
That sounds like an admission against his interest.
And the problem with that is that there are people who get into McKinsey with only undergraduate degrees, but it's rare. And so she was able to slide through and get into McKinsey with just one master's degree. Questionable whether she should actually have been allowed in my view. Then we have here, if we could pull this thing out, it'll take a little while to load.
This?
Yeah, this is the annual report, I believe, for Ranbaxy in 2003, which had a calendar year end of December 31st, 2003. And this is around the time that Ranbaxy is close to being, well, it's revered in India, 2003. Let's put it that way. So a nice 147-page annual report, something you can be sure people will never look at. But you go down the page a little bit, and there's the accomplishments.
It's interesting. It's okay. No, there we go. Accomplishments.
You'll see it in just a second. So here you see October 2003. Yeah, Ranbaxy receives the Economic Times Award for Corporate Excellence for the Company of the Year, at a very time when our strategy is to manufacture drugs that could kill people without checking any of them, and to distribute it especially to the parts of the world where there's no regulation, there's no infrastructure, and there are billions of people at risk. That's our strategy, and for that we get Company of the Year. Right? And then on the heels of that, you go down the page a little bit to the next page, and you're still in October, and you see up here, Ranbaxy signs an agreement with the William Jefferson Clinton Foundation to supply HIV/AIDS drugs to millions of people at a significantly reduced price. There is no such thing as the William Jefferson Clinton Foundation. Bill Clinton had no authority to sign anything on that entity connected to him's behalf at that time in 2003. But that's not enough for Bill. They entered into this agreement. There has to be evidence. Are you listening, FBI? There has to be evidence of email traffic back and forth to India. Who was negotiating this deal? Was it Bill himself? Was it Magaziner? There's got to be evidence inside the United States of America, and certainly in India, of what was going on in respect to this negotiation. And if you go back to that page, Jason, in November, the negotiation is followed up with Clinton's visit to India.
Oh.
Right? So he's there in India in November 2003. How did he get there? Who provided the jet? Was it perhaps Jeffrey Epstein? I don't know.
Whoa.
And what were they doing in India? For how long? Where were they staying? They went, I believe, to China afterwards. Where are the records of all this? We're dropping bombs in Iraq at this time. I got to believe that our Secret Service is keeping track of a former president at a highly sensitive time like this. So who knew about this trip? What was Bill actually doing over there? How come nobody, we went over this yesterday, there's an exhaustive file, the William J. Clinton Foundation FBI Volfa. There's no mention that I see in the notes of the crack team of Mueller, Comey, and maybe Rosenstein as counsel looking into any of this. Meanwhile, there are annual reports being published in India, saying that this Clinton Foundation is doing all sorts of work which it has no authority to do as a foundation. And here's this hard evidence. I didn't go out and print this annual report. It's, it's real evidence.
Wow.
So, lastly, what was going on in Man of the World, Conason in brief, and I'll probably characterize this, try to do it fairly. He discusses the period 2001-2 to 2005 as a period where the evil Republicans, George Bush Republicans, are loath to allow the fantastic do-gooders around the world to save money by using scarce money to buy generic drugs. And there's just evil Republicans who want to protect the branded pharma companies. That's the way he pitches it and the way a lot of other people pitch it. This is something from WHO which points out that, like anything else, the issue of counterfeit anything, the instant something sells in volume in any business, counterfeiters look at it and say, no sense of getting a Gucci sweatshirt, for $250 when I'll give you a Gucci sweatshirt for $50, or $20. It's going to happen. And to say that because you write some edict or you draft some law that you're going to change any of this is to be a fool's fool. So here we have the WHO writing an article or a presentation going through the concerns that were known. The thing came out in 2004, but it cites the fact that the World Health Organization pre-qualified. It mentions Ranbaxy drugs 28 November 2003 as being safe to use. We now know from Catherine Eban's work, that not a single HIV/AIDS drug was legitimately ever tested by Ranbaxy as of 28 November 2003. Indeed, as of August 2004. That instead what they were doing, they were in the business, they would send executives of Ranbaxy back to the United States to buy HIV/AIDS medicine that was good. And then they basically would put it in, the equivalent of putting in bottles that said Ranbaxy on it, and then they test other people's medicine and say, yeah, these Ranbaxy drugs, they work perfectly.
Wow.
And the Catherine Eban article starts, in the Fortune article, starts with this profiling of a female executive who had left the branded American world or the branded developed country world to go be a senior research person in India for Ranbaxy. And she was initially impressed by the factory in India and the test results until she said, wait a minute, nobody gets 99.99999% test results. Let me see a little
They're
bit.
Stupid.
Yeah, and it turned out the results were just invented. You tell me what you want and I'll give it to you. I'm telling you.
Unbelievable, Charles. Well, we've been speaking about this company for 2 years. So, it's interesting, too, because this morning, one of the comments on our Sunday with Charles episode from yesterday said, well, Charles has been at it for 2 years and he's still not doing anything about the Clintons. What are you doing here, Charles? You better get over to D.C. with the handcuffs.
I know, yeah.
But it is quite satisfying to actually see, although slowly, the wheels of justice seem to be turning in that these brothers are now being held to account.
Well, when I got into this in the very beginning, I appreciated that it was a massive scandal and a lot of people had a lot to lose should the full contours of it come out. We're hunting charity thieves now around the world. There's no guarantee that we're going to find every single one of them. We should be tested on the basis of how much of this do we ultimately expose, and in the end, who actually gets punished for it, and who pays what price to which group of afflicted people around the world, and do we learn from all this? That's how we should be judged. But when I got into this back in 2015, I said, wait a minute, I'm going to be taking on people who could actually be President of the United States and living in the White House had Hillary, God forbid, won. And she wasn't, when I started on it, she wasn't even an announced candidate. in March of 2015. And then how many people have how much egg on face for this around the world? And the World Health Organization, World Health Organization and the accounting profession, the legal profession, the regulators in multiple states and countries. A lot of people have a lot of egg on face. But where we are now, I think, with the decision to go after the Singhs, which they're in jail right now, waiting, and they're not not sitting there saying, well, what kind of curry should I have with what kind of caviar should I have with my curry? It's not pretty for them. And there are other people around this, speaking of not pretty,
Other people.
there are other issues in multiple jurisdictions around the world are watching this more closely. And finally, I hope people are going to say, no, wait a minute, Bill's taking credit for taking people's money to buy HIV/AIDS drugs. How come there's no evidence of any of that in financial statements of the Clinton Foundation until maybe 2007? What were they doing in 2002 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6? Where's the evidence of which governments? There are no government grants in any of this till 2008. Where's the disposition, the analysis of the government grants that were raised? And what drugs did they buy?
Well, this is one of the most frequently used phrases that you've just raised. There is no evidence. That usually means they destroyed it.
That's right, bleach pit.
Wow. All right. Well, Charles, there you go. That was sort of a traditional style presentation, ultra quick. It causes me to wonder, this was all happening right around the time that Obamacare came about, and a lot of these new, at least in New York, these insurance companies that came about, sometimes they mandate that you can only get generic drugs. So I wonder if these things aren't somehow interconnected. I mean, you said that Americans are sort of slaves to this. Does that come into it at all?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you talk about bad ideas, which is what Obamacare was, in my opinion, instead of trying to get the cost of health care down, this was a scheme to pretend that people were insured for paying portions of the cost of health care. And at a time when you think about around the world and in your life, so many things have gone down in cost that have to do with technology. So what we're doing now, cell phones, there are various aspects of our life that go way, way down, yet healthcare has to inexorably go up in cost.
Yeah.
So I think this generic idea was a bad patch, that they didn't think it through properly. They should have said, no, wait a minute, if in the United States we have healthcare delivery systems, we can make sure that your pills are tested. But why should we encourage the purchase of pills that are made in India when we can make them here? We're trying to get healthcare jobs. It's just a bad, an intellectually, let's just put it this way, shoddy think through of how to get the problem solved. And of course they didn't get the problem solved.
I think a lot of people who watch our show are going to look at this and they're going to say, Bill Gates is involved with the Clinton Foundation, this Ranbaxy thing. When we unravel it, starts to seem like anybody looking at it, even superficially, would see that this is deadly dangerous for anybody involved. And so when we look at Bill Gates' history as a eugenicist, starts to become a question that needs to be asked. Was this intentional?
Well, when I think through the need for regulation, I'm somebody who would like to say that if we all could regulate ourselves, you wouldn't need Big Brother to start regulating the whole country or the global economy.
Right.
But now these case studies of whether it's Microsoft monopolistic tendencies, I would argue Bloomberg's monopolistic tendencies with his operation. Remember in the 2000
financial reporting thing, you mean?
Well, and remember that there was a scandal that actually Jess Staley, who's now over the CEO of Barclays Bank, called out the Bloomberg reporters for snooping through communications of people on their Bloomberg terminal.
Oh.
Right. Yeah. So Bloomberg has put together this global collection of the most powerful investors in the world, all use his terminal. So they could
snoop on them.
So you could snoop.
Damn. So I'll tell you, Charles, sometimes it feels like there's very few honest people around.
Exactly.
And we're the suckers.
Exactly. Well, sadly. And that says on the news that Mike Bloomberg may actually step into the fray now that Joe Biden is so hopelessly tarnished.
All the biggest criminals are stepping up to the plate now that it seems like President Trump is actually draining the swamp. But this is what we're looking for. It's one of these things where you don't know what it is until you actually see it. But the Singh brothers finally going to jail, Epstein going to jail and then mysteriously disappearing,
right.
Ed Buck going to jail. These are people that would not have gone to jail if Hillary Clinton was president. I'm confident in that.
They'd probably be sleeping in the White House and alive.
and taking the furniture home with them. All right, Charles. Well, it's been an excellent Monday with Charles. People can chew on some of that information. This is going to be something we're going to have to keep watching.
Thank you, Jason.
All right, very good. Thanks for watching, everybody. Don't miss the Moriartys tonight, Unseen Libya at 8 p.m.